All right, now I'm going to make you the host again.
Okay.
Okay, back to you. I think, can everybody hear and see? I see Joni, you're on, yes. Nathaniel, yep, I get a nod there. Michelle, yes. Steven's joining us here.
That's
Michelle, are you Carrie's keeper at all today or not? Well, who knows about that? And Mel's got a school issue going on, so.
That spreadsheet is not on the screen, is it?
Yes, it is. Yep.
It is on the screen?
Yep, and right now it's full size, and you are on debt, the debt tab.
Okay.
Alan, do you want me to call Carrie?
Yeah, if you want, Michelle, and maybe, he has a hard time trying to figure out how to use a computer every now and then, so maybe if you want to see if he wants to join you. And
Okay, I'll call him.
all right, thank you. Although knowing Carrie, he probably doesn't remember that we're even doing this. It's like when I showed up before down there, he's like, what are you doing here today? Oh.
Which ones are from Kansas?
Bradshaw's having trouble trying to find anyone.
Oh, he's not on this.
And Bradshaw's got a staff meeting this morning. They told me so.
Well, you'll have it. He's going to have it.
Yeah,
You'll have a tape, so you can.
yeah, that's what I told him.
He's not back from class yet, so we'll see if he jumps on or not.
Okay, excellent. Thanks.
Are we ready to go then, or do we want to wait?
No, go ahead. You're all set, Dave. Go for it.
Okay.
Maybe I should introduce you ahead of time, huh? Or you want to self-introduce, Dave?
I'll go ahead.
So we are incredibly blessed to have Dave Sommermeyer kicking off this funding academy for us. And Dave, in his wisdom, would like to train all of you on utilizing spreadsheets and funding academy ideas that was developed way back when and rolled out throughout the U.S. Dave was a founder of that. We have Bill Cochran here today too. All of you know Bill, and Bill was instrumental in getting that started. Dave is a wealth of experience and knowledge, serving all over the country at Lutheran schools in different ways. I think starting at Long Island Lutheran, isn't that right, Dave? Is that where you kicked it off? And then
That's where I started. That's where I started.
and then eventually Lutheran Education Association of Houston as executive director, and great stories coming from there and things that he did to promote Lutheran schools and develop them, and also with the Funding Academy, a realization of how we don't in our schooling get a lot of understanding of funding of Lutheran schools, how to analyze debt, facilities, and compensation for our employees, and empty seat cost analysis, you name it. And Dave is a tremendous financial guru, a wealth of knowledge and experience there, as well as board development and analyzing policy-based governance, having written a lot of material on that as well. So it is a great blessing to have Dave with us, passing on his knowledge and wisdom, and to be joined by Bill Cochran as well. So two of the people that travel the country trying to promote Funding Academy and understanding to principals throughout our system so we would have healthy schools. One of the things that you see on your word file there is no margin, no mission. No mission is very true because too many of our schools have closed due to financial woes. And this is an effort to address that issue. And then hopefully get all of you a great understanding of budgets and financials, and then have all of you go out and train others in this process throughout the Missouri District. So thank you for agreeing to be part of it and for joining us. Thank you, a huge thank you to Dave. I owe him a great deal, and to Bill for being with us as well. That's my short intro. Hopefully I hit on a few points there.
Okay, well, good morning, and it's good to be inside today. It's been the 20s outside, and you asked me earlier if it was snowing, and I just saw some flurries, so who knows. Anyway, one of the things that is constantly in all my work and so forth is that people don't seem to understand school finances and don't understand how to deal with them in an effective way. And it's really, some of it goes against accounting principles from that particular standpoint. And it's, everybody seems to have a depreciation, but nobody funds it, collecting prior year's tuition and stuff like that. But the goal is, and this worksheet is spreadsheet I've used any number of times, versions of it, with schools that I've gone in to work with. Most schools have no idea what it costs to educate a student. They have no idea what their tuition needs to be in order to balance a budget. So what we're going to do is go through an exercise, and I'm going to just demonstrate some of the things here now that you could use to go back and determine the situation in your school and get that picture. After we're done here, we will send you a blank document that you see in front of you. You should have the instructions. I'll go through them a little bit as we go through it. But we'll just start there from a standpoint. And across the bottom of the spreadsheet, okay, and I trying to point that. Can you see my cursor moving there?
Yes.
Okay. Across the thing are tabs. Each one of these tabs is a different worksheet that eventually dumps all information into a budget. And the budget comes back, and the budget will show what tuition and fees need to be in order to balance the budget. If it's just a school or your school and church, okay, the combination of that. And we'll go back and say, this is what the tuition should be. And if your tuition is not that number, you put your number in, and you will see what the deficit operations is going to be. There's so many facets to it, and I think the best way is probably just to start working through it. And the first, just ignore the example up there in the budget from that standpoint, but I'll use that in the next thing. You see the blue line here between the H and the S. The second time you go through the worksheets, you will open that up. There's a whole bunch of columns missing, and I'll just do it right now, okay? You do that, and you click on hide, and it brings up a whole separate set of columns and so forth, but we'll deal with that the next time going through. That's used to distribute the expense or income through the various departments of the school. Now, it's set up at this particular point that there's a child care section, there is a preschool section, and then there is a school section, and there is a congregation section, and then there is also a compensation section, and we'll deal with those. Part of the thing is people don't, this page is to try to have people get a handle on their debt. And in this example, And this is example data that I just put in. The total indebtedness on the mortgage is $508,000. If you see as you move your cursor over any cell that has a red triangle in it, you will also get some other instructions or explanation of what is in there. The spreadsheet is designed that you can enter data into any of the blue cells, okay? But you can't enter data into the yellow cells. Yellow cells contain formulas. The blue cells simply accept data, okay? So part of the problem, and sometimes in the funding thing, is when you look at principal and interest, typically, a true and a GAAP financial statement would not include interest. Would not include principal, but principal, you've got to have cash coming in to cover your principal or your debt. So while the debt is $508,000, the payment for that debt is going to be $45,000. Okay, that's there, and also the interest. So you have the interest is down here, the principal is up there. Typically, they look at interest as an expense, and I've separated it out simply so that people auditing it can go back and look and deal with those things. There's an LCEF line of credit here, $54,000, and at this particular point, they're not planning on paying any of that off in this example. Otherwise, you would go back in here. Line of credits vary from lender to lender, okay? Some of them have to be paid off on an annual basis. Others have to be paid off every 3 years. So that's part of that understanding. If you had a vehicle, okay, suppose the school bought a bus, okay, what was the amount of debt still left? How much is principal, and how much is principal would go here, okay, and how much is interest for that would go down here. This is the interest on the line of credit, okay? Even though they're not paying the principal, you're going to have to pay the interest on that. Late fees and others. So this trying to give a place where you deal with indebtedness. Now there's two types of indebtedness. One is secured, okay, and that's basically secured by lien on the property or the facility. It would be a lien on the bus, okay, if you were buying a bus, et cetera, from that standpoint. So that is secured indebtedness. So if you have a mortgage with Church Extension Fund, they're going to hold your property as collateral for that. Then there's also unsecured indebtedness, okay? This could be borrowing from individuals. This could be your accounts payable. At the end of the year, you go into the next year and you're carrying over a bunch of payables that you haven't paid. Let's just say for this discussion that your fiscal year is July 1 to June 30. Now you can also go back at December 1. Those are the two, to January 1 to December 31. Sometimes that happens in congregations that have schools. Okay, typically most of them are shifting to a fiscal year that's more the school year, because that's the numbers that fluctuate the most, and it's tough to project otherwise.
So Dave, just a couple things while you hit on that. One, by the way, if anybody has any questions or anything, you can type it in the chat. The chat room is open. And right now, Dave will be receiving questions. They're going to him right now, or you can raise your hand and ask a question. So Dave, you kind of recommended a fiscal year going by the school year, which I think a lot of them have.
Right.
Is there a good argument or a reason if schools do not have kind of the school-based year and they're running more of a calendar year with their churches? Sometimes the church drives that. Is there a good argument or rationale to kind of bring to the church perhaps to say, move that fiscal year to more of the school year concept? And if you do that, how do you reconcile, because there's that gap of time in there, how do you make the shift?
Okay, can either do a half year, okay, financial. So if you're going to start in a fiscal year, switching from January to July, you would run a fiscal year or a year from January 1st to June 30th, and then pick up and start over again. Typically, the issue is a lot of church giving, okay, comes in the month of December. But again, you can project that, and even, I mean, the other places where congregations started schools after they had been in operation and had a fiscal year that was a calendar year from that standpoint. But because of enrollment changes, tuition changes, I mean, that those, and staffing changes, that's a much more significant portion of the budget that's easier to deal with on a July 1 fiscal year rather than a January 1st fiscal year. Does that answer you what you're looking for?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I appreciate that.
Okay. Will you see the chat room questions?
I will too. Yes, I believe so. They can go to everyone, or they can go just to you.
Yeah, if you see the chat room questions, then why don't you raise them from that particular standpoint? Because I probably won't be looking at that part of the
Sure.
screen most of the time, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's unsecured external. This is money, I mean, you owed to vendors, you owed to individuals. You may have borrowed $20,000 from an individual to get through the year, okay? That happens frequently. And it's unsecured and it's external, but there's unsecured internal. And that's where schools really get, and organizations get in a pickle, because they start borrowing funds internally and don't track it and don't have any means to pay it back, okay? This could be one of the big ones, okay, is this advanced tuition and fees payment. Typically, when people pay registration fees and pay tuition before July 1, or before they're technically the school year, but July 1, the fiscal year, that money is unearned income. And that should be set aside and not entered into your annual finances until July 1, because that's the fiscal year that it's going to be earned in. So anything that's coming in now for next year is really unearned income and should be set aside. Now, many organizations have that income coming in and they start spending it because they're short in cash, whatever else it happens to be. So technically they're borrowing it. And a lot of places do not recognize that borrowing kind of stuff. And I've seen where that's over $100,000, $150,000 in prepaid stuff that used to pay this current year's bills, but doesn't, really shouldn't be used until then. It should be put in a restricted account and then can be released from restriction. So technically that's borrowing money from temporarily restricted funds, okay? Or you borrow it from permanently restricted, where many organizations that have schools and churches are tapping the endowment money, which is technically permanently restricted and interest only is supposed to be used, but they're tapping that principal to, they're getting their voters and everybody else to approve releasing those funds out of that. So they're reducing their endowment. And the reality is you got to pay that back, or ought to pay that back, okay? So those are some temporarily and permanently restricted kinds of funds, and get a handle on that, okay? Because you got to pay it back. And here I said, at least they were starting to pay it back here in this example, okay? They basically had $50,000 in internal borrowing from other accounts, and were paying back, projected to pay back 50 of that. So they would start the next year with 15, they would be, 35,000 here. Okay, that's if they did that. So the total debt service, then it adds up all of those things that they're paying off. I mean, they're paying off with principal and interest $111,000 kind of thing. Here's a little worksheet that you can use to determine the amounts that as of the last day of the fiscal year. Really what you're trying to do is get to a situation where you borrow, or at the beginning of the year, that you can draw a line in the sand and says, we have not used any of next year's money. We paid off all of our debts. We paid off all of our bills up, from that standpoint. That's drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is what I always went back to organizations and say, here's the starting point. We got to get to that starting point to then move forward in what I would call a healthy kind of a situation. So this just kind of totals this, okay? So this number is a negative number. This is the accumulated operational deficit. A positive number indicates the accumulated operational surplus.
Dave?
Yep.
I was curious, Lamakowitz, I have a question. What would your advice be? I understand what you're saying about not going into the endowment and stuff like that, but that paid ahead tuition or dues or whatever they are, why would you not utilize that and track it and pay it back, of course, as opposed to dipping into your line of credit, which you're going to pay interest on?
I have no problems with that.
Pardon me?
I have no problems dealing with that as long as you recognize it.
Okay.
I mean, that's what I would do. I would probably tap into my internal stuff and track it before I went to the line of credit or went outside to borrow it.
All right, thank you. Because I think it's important for people to understand, because you're going to have boards that are going to say, no, you can't do that. We have to be, to be faithful to what we're saying. But the reality is cash is king and cash flow is what's crucial.
That is correct. I mean, I agree with that. Okay.
All right, thank you.
And you'll see now on all the rest of these worksheets, we're looking at, I would go back and put this year's budget in to get yourself familiar with numbers. Then you can go back in and put in next year's numbers here, okay, what you're projecting. So you're going to be able to see this year's as compared to next year's. They're going back in these two columns. At the end of the fiscal year, okay, what you simply do is delete the data in this column, copy this column, and paste it here so that you're always working. You've got your current year plus your projected year as you're working through your financial stuff, okay? Any more questions about debt? Again, you will find descriptions when you move a cursor over something. You're going to find a description that kind of helps maybe give you some information on what should go into that. Okay, we move to the next one. And this deals with facilities, okay? An example that we're using here, the church and the school are a combined organization. If the school is separate, then you're going to be able to separate it out. Typically what happens a lot of times is the utility bills are for the whole thing, the portion of the school. It could be for extended care. It could be for early childhood. It can be for the church, et cetera, et cetera. So the insurance and all this is, when I deal with insurance here, I say all except workers' comp, okay? Workers' comp is, I put that in the compensation area because it's a benefit that we're paying for the workers, okay, from that standpoint. So if you go through, I put the budget numbers in, and you would go back in and say, what is our insurance? What is our gas or fuel for heating, okay? What's our electric? What's our water? Telephone? You could put internet here, but you can also put it in some other places. I just leave that blank here because I picked up the internet connections under church operations or school operations, okay? Renovations, maintenance and repairs, service contract, okay? If you use a cleaning service, that would go here. Service contract for grounds, that would go here. If you have staff that you pay, that's going to come under the compensation tab, okay, from that standpoint. This is what you're paying. Office equipment and repairs, cleaning supplies, trash materials. A lot of times when you have a service contract, you pay for the cleaning supplies. It's probably cheaper to do it that way than have them do it. That way you can kind of control it. Now, you may have what you call a facilities expense, and you're going to see this in all of those, that isn't listed here, okay? What you can simply do, okay, is go down and type in here, and I'm just going to click on that, okay, from that standpoint, and facility expense. So let's just for the sake of the discussion, say it was painting, okay, you were going to painting something, and you wanted to add $1,000, okay? You can do that. You filled in the blue thing, okay, in return. As long as you change the words here, okay, the totals are all going to be included. So you see that total went up by that $1,000 from that standpoint. You could go back and change one of these, okay? Maybe you don't have any vehicles, so you don't have vehicle maintenance. So you could go back and then change this to, say, other, okay, whatever you wanted, and put a number in here. It's going to include it in all the totals. If you go back and, some people deal with spreadsheets, know how to add a line. I don't recommend it because, I really say you shouldn't do that in this because it'll screw up the formulas, okay? You're better off. So I put some other categories in there that to afford you the opportunity to do that from that standpoint, okay? If you were going to remodel something, you could put that number in here in renovations. Again, internet, I picked that up someplace else. Any questions about facilities? Okay, we move. Now, I recommend probably going across this way as you deal with things. You might play with the enrollment separately, okay? But we'll get there. Compensation. Now, compensation is set up into congregation compensation, maintenance compensation, school compensation, early childhood education, preschool, however you want to call it, okay, and then child care. This is before and after school, maybe summers, et cetera, kind of thing. So you go back and say, in the current year's budget, in church, it's $134,000. Retirement plan, disability, okay, you would put those in, Social Security for the above. Okay, the pastor may be called, okay, but the secretary is going to be, or other people may be in the organist and that type of thing. Youth could potentially be regular employees and have Social Security. Offset, people familiar with that, where the church reimburses for called workers, reimburses part of or all of Social Security, the self-insured Social Security. Health deductible, these were different kinds of things that people deal with. Workers' compensation, and I don't think I put a number in there, but and I left it blank in the others, but you would either pick up workers' compensation insurance here. I've always used a number of like 1% of what this number is in budgeting workers' comp. And I found that works pretty good. Pastor Carr, guest pastor. Now, if you would come back in here and say, well, we're going to add at some particular point an associate pastor, some of these numbers might change down here from that standpoint, okay? Maintenance compensation, really, I had nothing in here for maintenance because we were using a cleaning thing, and this church that I was working with, the board of trustees did all the maintenance and stuff like that. But again, if you had maintenance salaries here, you would put them here. And this is, I put them in their primary category. You're going to have some people up in here who maybe teach, okay? But we're going to distribute their salary a little bit later on. But you put their full salary up here and can deal with it that way. So you got the school's compensation. This is going to include all the teachers, secretaries, anybody, coaches, okay, administration, support staff, and again, all the benefits. Early childhood, the same way. And the same then for child care or extended care, whatever you want to call that. And you see that the total here, it's going to total everything up here that in this organization, it was $877,500 is what their total compensation cost would be. And this is where you would end up with what your total compensation costs are. Any questions about that? And again, we have that second column for next year, okay? Then we go to the church, okay? And this church, I mean, they had, when I was dealing with, they had bukus of categories that they were tracking on the thing, anywhere from Sunday school materials, confirmation, VBS, office supplies, what they contributed to the district and to Synod. They had a campaign consultant, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Again, you may not have many of these. Postage, okay. Background checks. You can change any of these that you don't have to something that you may have from that standpoint. Credit card fees, high school association memberships. Any questions about that? Okay, we go to the school tab. Here are some of the other continuing education. I put some of these in red when I was working with this particular school because this CPR training, okay, was reimbursed from someplace else, okay, but it still had to account for it. We accounted for the income in the income tab that came in to cover this. So those happen to be in red from that standpoint. Copier costs, instructional materials, text, okay, fax, tuition management, marketing. They gave teachers $1,500 to start up there was $1,500 to start up classrooms, postage. You see there was postage here and was also postage in the church. We could have just listed the total of this $1,200 and where was postage? And this $1,700, we could have just entered it one time as $2,950, okay? And then we would distribute it when we do the distribution. But they had two separate line items. Field trips, again, they had a lot of money budgeted for field trips. I can't remember, and we'll see later whether they had income coming in for that. Awards, athletics, yearbook. Okay, I think they charged the yearbook fee, special events, graduation. These were school expenses, okay? Here is an interesting area, okay? Events. One of the things that we were trying to do is determine what is the true cost of educating a child. So if you have a dinner auction, let's just say that from the standpoint, if you have a dinner auction, you've got some expenses that are involved in running the dinner auction, okay? It could be, food expense, venue expense, any other kinds of expenses, decorations, et cetera, et cetera. It's not fair, it's not proper to say that that's part of the cost of educating a child, okay? there may be differences of opinion on that, but what we did is we went and said, here is the total income from the dinner auction. Here was the expense, and the net income was $60,000. So the expense does not show up for running the event, does not show up as an expense in the cost of educating a student, but the profit from that shows up as income to help go offset the cost of educating a student. Everybody understand that concept? If you had a fun run, okay, you raised $5,000 and you had $300 in, just say you had water, or, you know, they gave the kids bananas or stuff like that who were running, okay, you actually raised $4,700, but this $300 is not part of the cost of educating a student. Book fair, you know, maybe you got 25% profit in the cost of the income, but you collected all the income, but you had to pay the book company $3,000. Those were school events. Church events, okay, could have been a golf tournament. Early childhood could have had something with a book fair, okay, that type of thing. Everybody understand that? Why we put events in there? You got any questions about whether events should go in there? There was one I said it was going to move forward when I was talking about, was it school? Church Catholic. One of the things that could happen here, this cost, okay, I mean, it's not going to show up in the cost of educating a child because this is all under the church, but it's a church thing. You could also go back and deal with that as an event. If you had a campaign, the expenses for the campaign are not part of the cost of educating a student, just the income coming in. So you kind of get a flavor of how that would work. Early childhood, okay, curriculum. They didn't have anything in continuing education. I think there ought to be for the staff. Field trips, snacks. Okay, so the early childhood program had here $5,000 in direct expense. Child care, all of this has nothing, I put nothing in this to illustrate that you're still going to see the child care cost of something when we add in the compensation and the facilities and some of those other kinds of things. But all of these budget items were covered as part of the school budget, and they just wrote off part of that to the thing. So you got the child extended care program, you're probably making a bunch of copies, okay, maybe for the kids to work on, but you're not showing it here. It comes out as copier expense, and that's probably allocated to the early childhood program when we get to the budget. Okay, income. This is where we start to track all of the income that comes in. The church, $415,000 in the plate, okay, and it's the Sunday giving, and that's so forth. Sunday school, memorials, church campaign income, okay, you had that campaign expense, but you had church campaign income coming in here. School campaign, well, there's none. I have some categories, okay, facility rental, the church is getting credit for renting out the gymnasium. School maybe had some special appeals. The church had some special appeals. Now again, the special appeals, you see that there is equal K 28. Okay, so you're going to this formula goes back here and said income from school special appeals. So that $2,000 came from down here over to there. This $2,000 was the total of a Christmas appeal, a Thanksgiving appeal, Easter appeal, end of the year appeal, grandparents appeal from that particular standpoint that the school may have run. Income designation, and they're over here. You see some other areas where those come from that particular standpoint. Concert income, athletic gates and concessions, auxiliary income. This would be money that you would get from auxiliary organizations such as PTL or boosters. Released from restricted. This would be income that goes back and said that we had borrowed, we set money aside in a we put the money aside that came in from registration fees and so forth into a temporarily restricted account. At this particular time, you can release it here, okay? That's different than if you borrowed it ahead of time, they got to pay it back. Here, you put it away, but now this is a place where you go back and gather income. Income from designated financial assistance. This yellow line means there's going to be a place over here where that's calculated from that standpoint, okay? Designated for financial assistance. None of that, there's nothing here. Part of, it depends on what state you're in. In Indiana here, they have choice dollars. I know the high school here gets over $1.5 million just from choice dollars. And this was money that comes from the legislature, but it was designated for financial assistance. They also have student granting organization money coming in. You may have some place that's going to provide some financial assistance that's designated for that. It's not going to come in as tuition, but it's going to come in this particular area. Investment income, campaign consultant, that was that got paid for by somebody paid for that campaign consultant at this particular place that it was. Income from special church appeal, district reimbursement. The district reimbursed the school for something at that particular time. Child care income, okay, you got to account for it. This is the total child care income transfers to the budget. This could be part of the problem in trying to deal with child care. There are so many variations, okay, and trying to deal with it when you're dealing with a number of different schools. Child care was one of the hardest ones. Preschool is another one, but I'll show you how we address that. So you go back and say, they drop in. Sometimes schools have care during vacation over Christmas, or on you got school holidays that say Martin Luther King Day, that parents don't have a place to send their kids, but the child care program runs. You've got income coming from all those various sources, okay? And it can be drop in. Some of them have regular kinds of things. So you just got to go back and say, what's our total projected income going to be from that? So here's where some categories: registration fee, before and after school care, daycare, okay, AM care for afternoon childhood, and PM care for morning early childhood. Those are all things that were not where you was just.
No, don't do that now.
Hey, Dave, just one quick question. I think I missed this from Stephen. Yes, what about designated restricted funds that are used to fund items or expenses from other areas? How does that get tracked in the income section?
Okay, you could be here. It would be released from restricted. Okay, because it was given, it was put into a temporarily restricted account. Okay, now you're gonna buy, and now you're gonna use that money for a purchase. Okay, so you have to. That's where you declare it as income. You don't declare it as income when it comes in, because it goes into restricted. It's not operational income until it's released. Which we're really looking at operational income in all of this and operational expenses. Well, when you have the operational expense for a restricted thing, then you have to transfer the money over to cover it. I put in my budget, I have a line item in my budgets. I have a line item for non-budgeted designated expense and non-budgeted designated income. And I could probably add that here. Okay, so it didn't affect that spending that money from the restricted thing doesn't impact the bottom line, okay? And it sometimes, I had $50,000, $100,000 in money that was given for certain things that when maybe was given for an improvement or something of that nature, that we would transfer money that way. That didn't affect the bottom line and the cost of education. Okay? Does that make sense? Did that answer your question, Al?
Yes, yeah. I see Stephen shaking his head yes. So I think that's, yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Discounts. Okay. There are discounts all over the place. Sometimes I even go back and say that they're entitlements. In this case, okay, there are member students, okay, in this example, member students receive a $1,000 discount for school discount, okay? There's a member early childhood discount, which is $0. Most places are not giving discounts to early childhood because people were going to be on the outside. They're going to be paying full price for that, okay? It's typically not discounted, although some of them are. This example had the church gives discounts to sister LCMS congregations, and we can talk about that a little bit later on, but there's no discount for early childhood, but the sister congregations get a $500 discount. Over here, these numbers in this particular column transfer from the enrollment tab, okay? There are 46 students who are members of the congregation. $1,000 discount is $46,000. There are 13 who are sister LCMS congregations, okay? And they're going to get $6,500. I mean, there's 13 of them. So you got, there's no discount here, but there were 48 in that particular category, so it doesn't really make any difference. The number just transfers over. Now you got a member second child discount for in the school for second child, for third child, and for fourth child. This is where the amount of the discounts. So there were 16 kids involved in that, to a total of $9,500. Okay. Now some of these discounts I almost go back and say are entitlements. It costs the same to educate the second child as it does the first child from that standpoint. And when we start giving these discounts, any of the discounts there actually go back and force you to raise your tuition to cover those discounts unless those discounts are funded some way. And we'll see that a little bit later. And so we had the sister congregation, second, third, and fourth, okay, the same discounts as was for members. Community members pay the full tuition, but they do get a second, third, same discounts for the second, third in this example. So again, you look at multiple student discounts. I mean, you're 10,000, 13,000, and 7,000. I mean, you're $20,000 just in those multiple student discounts. And then you've got church staff discount and school staff discount. Okay, from that standpoint, there's another. I don't know why that didn't total to 30,000. Okay, well, I'll fix that. That should have totaled to 30,000. Okay. Let me fix that quick. Okay, $30,000 there. And I'll double check to make sure that formula is right. And when I send you the blank one, early childhood financial assistance, school tuition financial assistance. So those are other discounts. So at this particular point, they're giving $130,000, almost $140,000 in discounts. And here is financial assistance, documented need basis. These are the totals that go down here. Okay, when you put it in there. There may be some administrative determined, however you work your financial assistance kind of thing. There could be scholarships. Some schools give us scholarships, for like straight A students and stuff like that. There could be some named scholarships that typically student gets the Summermeyer discount or the Cochrane discount because we put money into. We pay that every year, or we made an investment in their permanently restricted funds that provide interest income to provide for those scholarships. Now, those could be, again, you're going to have to look at probably track those someplace else from that standpoint. Any questions about discounts? Okay, now we get to a fun one, enrollment. And this is part of this is tough to track, but here is the enrollment. Okay, you have the member, you have the sister congregations, you have the community. Now, you may be able to go back and say, that you have some other category, but if you don't have the sister thing, these numbers zero, and the zero and out does not happen. But this was the distribution at this particular school of, they got 109 students. This is the total. Okay, how many were faculty and staff? Okay, and these numbers down here are the numbers that transferred over to the discount page. Okay. They have 109 students. One of the things that this spreadsheet will work is that I use the number in everything that I've done, that a full class size for a teacher would be 25, okay? 20 in kindergarten, but 25. Now, you may go back and say that we have got different, that we set the maximum class size at 22. So you could go back and change these all to 22, or you could say 20 and only 15 in kindergarten. You could change those. But based on what I would do in my finances and deal with, and I've seen class sizes, as high as schools allowing as high as 35, 36 kids in a particular class. I know I battled with our parents and their moms in Texas when I was putting elementary school tuition together, and I based it on 25. They came back and said, well, we want it set on 20. Well, I showed them that if we set it at 20 rather than 25, their tuition was going to go up almost $2,500. I mean, there's no data that shows that a class size of 25 or 20 is any better as far as education of kids, unless you're dealing with kids with academic issues or other kinds of challenges from that particular standpoint. But in this example, they have 220 seats. So you're really looking at 110 of their seats are not full. when it all comes down, this number right here is the value of their empty seats. Okay, this is to me is a big issue. Is $666,000. I mean, that number, when everything is done, comes back here automatically from, just let's see if I can find it comes back from the budget number from that standpoint, okay, and the budget from the budget. So it's $666,000. You will end up with a number of saying this is what the value of your empty seats are. That question then goes back, how do I fill those empty seats? What do I have to do to fill those? The more of the empty seats I fill, the better off I'm going to be financially. I mean, my goal was always to say I would want to be at 80% of my staffed seats full. So if you were looking here, I would look for that number. My goal was always 100, have been 170 in this number here, ballpark, because that's about 80% of the staff seats full. This gives a breakdown of how many were, K to 5, I mean, 6 to 8, sometimes because schools would go back and have a different middle school tuition. Okay, you can put high school numbers in here and you would get that as well. Any questions about how to fill that out? The pre-K, okay, early childhood from that particular standpoint is a tough one, again, because programs are all over the place. Some kids come half day 2 days a week, some come half day 3 days a week, some come 5 days a week in the afternoon, or any variety of or they come full time. So what we did in this is said that we're going to determine how many, and you can see the instructions are up here. It's going to be based on a half day of the program equaling 1 period. So if they only came on Monday for a half day, that would be 1 period. If they came 5 days on Monday morning, okay, that would be equal 5 periods. And if they came morning and afternoon, all week long, that would be 10 periods. If they came 3 days a week for a full day, that would be 6 periods. So that's how this is set up, okay? Now you may want to come back and try some others. Everybody I've talked to says this seems to work pretty well. Again, you go back and say, depends on what kind of programs you have. So pre-K4, pre-K3, pre-K2, infants and toddlers, you're going to get into a whole other ballgame of figuring those out. But when at this particular school, there were a total of 93 periods, okay? And what we do is we figure the cost of 1 period. And once we figure the cost of 1 period, if a student's coming 5, we just say 5 times that number to determine what the tuition would be. Any questions about that? So, I mean, here was this calculated the number of periods for you. Just got to say what kids came, whether it's a community student or whether it's member enrollment. And if you and staff, this school had no students in their early childhood program from the congregation. Typically that would be populated, differently, but that was this one particular school where I pulled this data from that standpoint. Any questions? Okay. All of this information transfers over to a budget, okay, and we're going to get back to that. You can see the budget, almost every place is a yellow box. Yellow boxes have formulas, so they're pulling the information from some other places, and we'll deal with that. Now let's go back to the debt. every one of these spreadsheets is going to have a blue line like that. And if you go at the top of the thing, okay, and just click on that and drag it over, then right click on the mouse and say unhide. There's a whole bunch of columns that now come in to play. And this is where we go back and distribute the amount in this particular column, okay, to the church, to the school, to the preschool, childcare. If there was an expense that should be borne by those particular things. So let's just take these, and you can ignore the example up top. That's just really going and saying the church was 25. This line of example up here is not included in the totals, but when you, it's an example that when you get your blank spreadsheet is there to help you understand that. And they determined that whatever the mortgage was for, okay, that 20% of it was the church's responsibility, 75% of it, so it looks to me like most of this was for some kind of an educational wing that the church used some of, maybe a portion of it, maybe an office or two, but the preschool and the child care program used part of that facility. So we distributed that debt, that mortgage payment, over the different programs, or the different departments, what I call these, okay, the church department, school department, preschool, in that amount of a distribution, okay? Now, you enter the percentage. It's the percentage of this amount. The formula is going to go back and say 20% of this number. I mean, this formula goes back and says 20% of this number is that. So you see the formula here is going to show this percentage times that. If I change this percentage, I'm going to do some changes here. Let's just say this was 30, okay? I changed the amount, but you look over here, now this number is greater than this number. This 100%, I mean, it's now 110%. That's the fail-safe kind of thing, the self-check that you've got this distributed 100%. Sometimes you may have done it and this comes out to be 98%. You got to go back and add a percent someplace to get. I got to stretch out my leg here, get the cramp. So you see how that works. Any questions about that? So I've got to go back here and change this back to 20. And again, it's a blue box, so I can change it, okay? And the instructions will tell you how, if you enter something accidentally into a formula box, how to fix that. Now again, the interest payments were the same as the debt, okay? Here, the LCEF, line of credit, the church was paying 100% of that. The church is the one that said they borrowed it. That might have been distributed amongst the others too from that standpoint, okay, and 100%. So you see these totals over here should total the numbers that you have in the columns there as you distribute the expense. Now what happens is this $111,000, if we go back to the budget, and we get into debt service, okay? You see how this is the 111,000. That's 100% of the budget. The child care's portion of that was 2%. Okay, and the early childhood program was 1%. The school was 66%, and the church was 31% of that. This is the percentage of the total, but these numbers here came directly from the debt, numbers there, those totals are the same totals that were down here from that particular standpoint. So they go over to the budget, distributing it to those various areas. And we go through the same way now with facilities, and you're going to would open this up, unhide, and here was the distribution for those particular things. Now you see, I remember I added a painting as an example. It didn't carry over because now I have got to go back and distribute that, okay, in order for that to go into the budget. So I can go back and 20, and I'm going to say 40 here, okay, because that'll get me to 100%. So any number that's in here, you've got to go back and make sure you've got the distribution of how you want to deal with it, okay? And this should equal the budget, then this should equal 100%. Those are the checks that you did it correctly from that standpoint. Compensation. Again, unhide. What you do is you get the arrow there and you hold that down. You hold your left button down to highlight those, and then you can right click and unhide. Now, what was determined that 85%, you have to go back and say now, is any of that compensation was 85% of it was the church and 15% of it was the school. And maybe it was because the organist was also the 7th grade teacher, for this example. You can go through and take any one of those scenarios, but then you got to break out the percentage of it. So of the $117,000, about $25,000 of it was a school expense, even though that because the person was primarily here. It could have been a combination of an organist and a youth director. Okay, the people had secondary responsibilities as from teachers. Any questions about that? And you go through that. I want to try to get done here. You go through any one of those and you see how it was distributed. Okay, 2% of this one was charged to the church. And that maybe is because the receptionist who answered the phone answered for the church and the school from that particular standpoint. Now, early childhood compensation, okay, was all preschool. It was all 100% the preschool staff, and the same way with early childhood staff and so forth. So there was no distribution to the school or to the church. Okay, here again, you go back in some of these particular areas that office supplies, 50% was the church, 50% was the school. Didn't charge any of those to could have possibly, but most of that, I mean, down here was credit card fees and so forth was 50% to church and 50% to the school. Some people paid their contributions by credit card or debit or whatever it happens to be. So you get that distribution. Again, all these numbers transfer over to the budget, and you can deal with the school. This distribution is a challenge sometime in getting what's a proper thing, and you can just use a calculator on the side sometimes to deal with that. Now here is one, okay, the internet. Remember we had talked about that. 10% to the church, 80% to the school, and 10% to the preschool. Child care didn't use it. Now, I imagine maybe they could have, from that standpoint. But you go back and say, here's where the copier costs got picked up with the child care copy costs, preschool. And this is in the school's expense kind of thing from that standpoint. So you go back and deal with the distribution. You got to have a distribution for every number that you have over here. And again, it was $83,000 in the school. The events one, I don't know that you've got most of it here, so there's really no need to distribute this one. These totals carry over, okay? But you could do that and say this is 100% school, et cetera. Early childhood. Okay, when you got into instructional materials, it was all 100%. All this went to the early childhood program. It was all identifiable that way. Child care didn't have any distribution, okay? The income, there's no other distribution than this. The discounts, enrollment tab stays the same, okay? Now what happens is we're going to get over to the budget. All that information from those worksheets transfers to the budget. Remember, there were 93 sections or periods in the early childhood program, okay? You take this expense and divide it by 93 and you come out with $626. That's the cost of one period. If a person came full-time to early childhood program, 10 days, 10 periods, 5 full days, times 10, the tuition would be $6,000, or what you need, okay? Needed from each student is $6,260. Now, you may do that as part of the tuition and part of it as some fees and so forth. The cost to educate a child, okay, here's what is really $8,126. Okay, how's that paid for? The child care income, you brought over from the income page, and we subtract that from this, and basically the early childhood program here, the child care program here is operating at a $410 deficit. This $415,000 came over from the income page. All this stuff, a lot of comes over the income page. Remember, that was the amount of money that the church collected in church contributions. So you go through all of these areas where you could potentially have income coming in. If there's zero coming from those particular things, the zero comes over as the total. So then you come down and you're going to get a number. This is the total church after the church. The church had $415,000, but they had this other income. So the church has available for operations $525,000. The school has $110,000, and there's $1,000 in the early childhood program. Now the church subsidy for member tuition. Remember back in the discounts that the member tuition discounts were $46,000. Okay, so the church, go back here in the budget, we're asking the church, saying you pay that $46,000, and goes now then as a credit to the school. Church subsidy for staff members. Now, Again, there's only one staff member here, so from the church, and there were 4 from the school. The 4 from the school, the church is not necessarily subsidizing. This is going back and saying that the church is giving a discount to its church operations, is giving a discount to the pastor for having his kid in school, and that was $5,000. Okay, and that number comes over here. General subsidy, church subsidy to the school, at this particular point, it's 0. Church subsidy for sister LCMS congregations, here was the number, $7,500. Total church commitment to the school, member discount plus general subsidy is $60,000. The amount congregation needs to cover its responsibilities is $376,000, which leaves it, I mean, that's these responsibilities, leaves a balance of income surplus or deficit for the church. And it's got $148,000 surplus income. Okay. And you go through that, and you can, the school, again, here is the amount needed from early childhood program to cover its expenses. This is how much the school needs to cover its expenses. Okay, and you get the members, and the school covering this, calculates all the discounts. Here's the numbers that you put in of 25. This is uncollectible. How much tuition do you project as being uncollectible? How much do you project being an attrition? The net students transferring out during the year or withdrawing or whatever else happens to be. That's an expense that's got to be covered. So I go into elementary school, and I say, what kind of fees do we have? We're collecting a $100 fee for application, but again, that's 20 applications, so that income is $2,700. Registration, $300, and that's times the 109 students. Technology, $200 times the 109 students, an activity fee. There may be some other fees for 109 students, but again, there's no other fees, so there's no income coming in here. There's $600 is in fees. The rest of it for each student. The rest of it's got to come in from tuition, okay? So the rounded tuition and fee numbers are still got to be $8,100. This comes down and says if it's, when everything is taken into consideration, here's the amount needed from tuition and fees is $714,000 after to cover the costs and so forth. If tuition is set at tuition and fees are $8,200, okay, then you would get $10,000 margin. $14,000 margin, $25,000 margin was $84,000. If your tuition and fees at this particular point only total $6,000, in other words, the tuition plus $6,000, so it would be $54,000 and $600,000. You're going to end up with a deficit of $236,000 in the school operations. Same thing happens with the middle school. You go through that. I mean, the early childhood calculator. You're gonna, the numbers will appear here of what tuition would be. So it's going back here and saying, for the member, first child tuition should be, $6,500 from that standpoint. Okay, community is going to be $7,500. Okay, plus the $600 tuition fee. That's where you get to the $8,100. Calculate that again for, suppose you're only charging $400 rather than the $520 that you ought to be charging from that particular standpoint. It's you get a margin. But if you're only charging 400, you got a deficit there. And then you come back down here and say, here was the congregation surplus. Here is the school surplus or deficit. Extended care, early childhood, the total operations is operating at an $86,000 deficit. Okay, I mean, you come up with that number. Now, if that's the case, then how do you go back and correct that, get to the point where it's a positive kind of number? Well, you can go back and say, well, let's go back and say we're going to raise our tuition and fees to $7,000. That gives us a tuition of $6,400 and $600 in registration fee. Okay. Put that in. That reduces the deficit to 127. We come down here, and by reducing that deficit to 127, we end up with a net operations of 22,890. At this particular point, the whole surplus that the congregation's got, this $148,000, is going to offset the deficit as far as the school. Now you could go back and say, we took out the specific items. I mean, you can say $525,000 went to the school, but we took out the specific items to get it down to the 148,000.
Dave, is this a good spot to kind of bring this session to a close? And
Yeah.
We're scheduled back February 28th at 10 a.m.
That's
Or-
fine.
Zoom meeting. And then I think your proposal to all of them is they'll be sent the blank spreadsheet.
I
You
will send
create
you a spreadsheet without any numbers in it. Okay.
And then they'll start plugging in their own numbers and find out where they have questions doing that.
Yep. And again, if you got questions and stuff as you go through, you want to email me, that's fine. And I'll try to respond that way. But basically, we'll come back and have a discussion, maybe look at somebody's and say, here's what you came up with. How did you deal with that? How do you deal with this particular question?
Awesome. Obviously, Dave is a financial guru here and spent a lot of time putting together these spreadsheets. I mean, he's quite amazing when it comes to answering any questions with finances like this. So certainly utilize him as a resource with that. Any questions from the group before we close up? And you'll get an email from me with the blank spreadsheet.
Yeah. So
Have the ability to ask any questions and go through that. And then I'll send you a reminder about the Zoom session at 10 a.m. on February 28th.
Yeah, that's fine. The instructions, I mean, if you have those open as you're going through, I mean, as you see that they would they go tab by tab from that particular standpoint in dealing with that. Okay. So I covered most of the things, that were in the instructions, but when you get to a spot you're stuck, you look at those instructions and those may provide you some information kind of thing. And again, if anybody's got any particular questions with something that you want to know how best to do it, please feel free to email me.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. As always, well done and great job. We appreciate your time with this and walking us all through it.
Or
look forward to seeing everyone crunch their numbers.
Yeah. I mean, I'd tell you to call me, but I don't take any calls from caller unknown. Kind of
Well, and I can always connect you with Dave. So if you have any questions, certainly email. You can email me too, and I'll connect you and Dave together if you have questions about that. And we'll make that happen.
Okay. Any questions?
No, that's a lot at once. So awesome, excellent. check out the email. It'll be coming up. We'll send that forth, and then we look forward to session number 2 a month away or so. We'll do the same format again.
And Al, if you just stay on the line, and you and I can just have a quick discussion here at the end, and everybody else.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everyone. Blessings on your day.
Have a good day.
And Dave, I'm going to reclaim the screen, if you don't mind, and that way I can.
Go right ahead.
All right. I think I reclaimed, so hang on just 1 second while I do that.